In this video, we're going to look at the topic of trust versus fear. And do you trust your body to heal? Now, one of my favorite phrases is, your body's ability to heal is greater than anyone has permitted you to believe. Now, in a previous video, we looked at how the body has an ability to self-heal and how in many cases we do know this and we trust. We trust that our body is going to heal. So, for example, if you cut your finger, you're probably going to trust that it is automatically going to self-heal. You're probably going to wash it, put a plaster on, and then let it go. You just innately trust that your body is going to heal that cut. Now, it's the same even if you break your arm. You go and have it set, it's put in a cast, and you trust that the body is going to heal itself. And what we have to remember is it's not the cast that is healing the body. The body is doing the self-healing while it is given the opportunity to stay in one position so that it can self-heal. In other words, it's not the cast that is doing the healing, the body is doing the healing. So why is it that sometimes we doubt whether we can get better? And normally this will be for other types of symptoms and diagnosed health conditions, say for example, irritable bowel, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, post-viral fatigue, and a whole host of other diagnosed health conditions. Why is it that sometimes we doubt whether we can get better? And why is it that we go into fear? So it's not just doubt, we go into fear and we have a lot of fearful thoughts and negative, pessimistic, worst case scenario thoughts of things getting worse rather than getting better. Why is this? Well, here's a question for you. Have you been unconsciously conditioned to think that illness is wrong or a mistake? So just have a think about this. Why do you think you get ill? And what have you been told about illness? What are your beliefs around illness? Because a lot of these beliefs and these thoughts are very, very unconscious. We automatically think them and then we don't question them. So where do all these thoughts and conditioning and programming come from? Well, they just get infused into us as we're growing up and we don't even know it's happening. So where do all these thoughts come from? Well, if you think about your environment when you were growing up, and I'm talking about the first several years of your life, all these thoughts and programming and conditioning are going to be coming from the people around you and from your environment. Now, the people around you in your environment, that's going to include your immediate family or your caregivers, and it's also going to include your schooling system, and it's also going to include the culture and the society and the country that you grow up in. It may also be influenced by your religious upbringing. There are just so many different moving parts to what conditions and programs us. But the thing is, our conditioning and our programming is very unconscious because it happens during the first formative years of our life when we're soaking everything up and we don't even realize that that is happening because we're just being a child. But it's happening whether we're aware of it or not. And then it becomes automatic and we automatically think, well, this is how life is, this is how I am, this is what X means, X equals Y, and this is how it is. But maybe it's not that way. Maybe there's another way to look at things. So if you think about when you get ill, when you get symptoms or you have a health condition, what are the thoughts that you're thinking? And what thought patterns are consistently going through your mind? And also, what do other people say? Because we can be so influenced by what other people believe and think and say to us. And even though we may have one idea of of what we believe to be the problem or the cause, then we can listen to somebody else talk about it and we can get swayed by their opinion. And this is very common, especially when we're starting to explore natural alternatives and natural healing therapies. And then we come across other people who are not into that. And they just believe, well, the only thing that you do is that you go to a doctor and you take medication or you get surgery. And I'm not saying that's wrong, by the way. It's just that that is just one approach. But then we can get swayed by other people's opinions. And what we have to remember is that if other people don't know other alternatives, then they're only going to be speaking from what they know, and that may be a limited amount of information. So we have to be really careful of buying into what other people say, and we need to make sure that we're coming to our own conclusions. And that is often going to require that we do some extra learning and we explore deeper possibilities and meanings around illness. So, the question is, have you been unconsciously conditioned to be afraid of symptoms and to think that something is wrong when the body has got sick? And really ask yourself that. As I ask this question to you now, have you been unconsciously conditioned to be afraid of your symptoms? Because if you have, I'd like to offer another possibility. So remember, in previous videos, we looked at how symptoms and pain and fatigue are often the body's way of getting your attention. In other words, they're not random, they're not wrong, they're not a mistake, they're actually the body's very intelligent way of getting your attention. And to review this, I recommend that you go back and look at the 3 levels of body communication, where I explained how the body starts off with sensations, which then move to stress and emotions, which then move to symptoms. So symptoms, as we know, are often a sign of self-healing, of the body restoring balance, or what is called homeostasis. Because as far as the body is concerned, in order to maintain health, it needs to maintain homeostasis, which means balance. So a very simple example of homeostasis in the body is the alkaline acid balance. The body is always working internally inside every cell to maintain acid-alkaline balance, pH balance. Now that balance is going on in many, many different ways inside the body. And homeostasis is needed in order that we stay healthy and also that we maintain happiness, and the two go hand in hand. And if we're not happy, we're not going to be healthy, because what happens in our mind and our emotions changes our physiology. And this is one of the problems that most people are up against without realizing it, is that they have a symptom, but they're not tying up the correlating emotions and stress and trauma that have caused the body to go out of balance and to create a lack of homeostasis, which then creates the physiological knock-on effects of symptoms. So we must remember that we are a holistic being, and that whatever is happening in our mind, our emotions, our body, our spirit, our energy, everything is interconnected and overlapping. And in particular, what is happening in our mind and our emotions is going to change our physiology. So our body has this natural self-balancing healing cycle, which is constantly working to maintain homeostasis, and if we've lost homeostasis, to restore it. And I talked about this in a previous video, the stress regeneration cycle, where if we go through a stress phase, we're going to have to go through a corresponding regeneration phase to even things out. And this is the yin-yang. This is the concept of yin-yang, which is this balancing cycle. So if symptoms are intelligent and they're not a mistake, and they're even sometimes and even often a sign of self-healing, the question then comes, is it right to be afraid of symptoms? Why should we be afraid of symptoms if they're actually intelligent, they're not a mistake, the body is far too intelligent to make mistakes, and symptoms are often a sign of self-healing? Why do we then become afraid of our symptoms? Well, this comes back to the conditioning. It comes back to the conditioning and the programming of what were you taught about illness when you grew up. And only you can know that answer. And I really encourage you to contemplate this question. What were you taught about symptoms and illness when you were growing up? And what has become your default perspective and belief system around illness? Now, in my ebook, The Essential Health Beliefs Guide, I explain more about this and how our unconscious beliefs determine our health outcomes. Because if we don't know what we don't know, then we're not seeing all the options that are available to us. Now, this is exactly what it was like for me. If I think back to 30 years ago when I was growing up in the UK and I was living in London, and the only thing that I knew was to go to a doctor. Now, please remember, I'm not saying it's wrong or bad to go to a doctor. What I'm saying is it's not the only choice. And it can be quite a limited choice if we're not seeing the bigger picture of illness. But when I was growing up, I was taught that if you're sick, you go to a doctor and you get medication, a pill or an ointment, and if necessary, you go into hospital and you have an operation. And that was all I knew. And then one day, when I had injured my back, and I didn't even really know I'd injured my back originally because it was quite subtle, but over a period of a few weeks, I found myself being unable to bend over. And after about 3 months, when I couldn't put my sock on one day, I thought, this is ridiculous. This just can't be right that I can't bend over and put my sock on. And I was only about 26 at the time. And I thought, I've got to find a solution to this. But when I went to the doctor, they said, well, we can't really see that there's anything wrong and we can't really help you. So that set me off on my first journey into exploring other options beyond going to the doctor. And I found my way to my very first natural therapist, which was an osteopath. And he said to me, well, you should have come to me immediately. You'd injured yourself because now you've compensated, or your body has compensated, and now it's going to take longer to get better. Now, what I didn't know at that time was that the reason that my back had actually weakened and gone out, as we tend to say, was because I had emotional issues underneath. And I talk about that in another video, and I've included that video in the bonus section of this series so that you can easily watch it. But the point here is that our beliefs, our unconscious beliefs, drive what we think is possible. And without knowing it, we can really be restricting ourselves and limiting ourselves in what is possible. So what if symptoms are actually your best friend? They're not your enemy. And if you think about the type of language that people tend to use when they're talking about their symptoms, often it will be the language of war and conflict. It's like, I hate my symptoms. I just want to get rid of my symptoms. I hate this illness. Just really angry, conflicting language that we use when we're talking about illness. So when you're ill and you have symptoms, what language do you use to describe your symptoms and how you want to get well? Really become aware of this, because when we start to see that symptoms are not our enemy and that actually they can be our best friend, then everything starts to change because our whole perspective changes. And what if symptoms are actually a gift? They're here to teach you something. They're here to show you a better way of living. They're there to show you how to move from point A to point B, which is really about moving from unhappiness to happiness. Would that help you to see your illness in a different light? Would it help you to reduce the fear around being ill? Now, there's a wonderful book by Anita called Dying to Be Me, which is a great read. And it's a true story and one of many similar stories that I've read about, heard about, or had firsthand experience of from speaking with colleagues and friends and clients. But this story is the true story of how Anita was literally on her deathbed in hospital, just a few hours away from dying, very, very sick and emaciated with cancer. Her whole body was full of cancerous tumors. and she had a near-death experience where she saw that the true purpose of life was love, and that actually the biggest healing principle was love. And she had a miraculous, or some say miraculous, recovery. And literally, as she was dying, she was completely healed. And she became completely well again without any medication, without any surgeries, just complete spontaneous healing. Now, most people think this is miraculous, they think it's strange, it's maybe unbelievable. But this is the power of our body. It has the power to self-heal, and her story is an extreme example of this. And most people don't have to go to such an extreme place, but I share this to share how our body has a miraculous, inverted commas, ability to self-heal. And that the more we understand this, the more that we understand that miracles are actually normal. That it's normal for these types of transformations to happen if we understand what is causing illness and what needs to happen in order to heal it. Now, she was shown in quite an extraordinary way, and I believe so that she could come back and tell her story and inspire people like yourself and like me to understand this topic in a different way. We don't have to go to such an extreme situation, but if we are experiencing chronic, ongoing, long-term symptoms, which have been going on for months or years, which is what most of the clients that I work with have been experiencing, then maybe it's time to look at things in a different light, and it's time to understand the underlying reasons for illness and what it is that we need to do and can do to instigate the self-healing powers of the body. So why is it that when we want to get well, and obviously nobody enjoys being sick, nobody enjoys having symptoms, why is it that when we're unwell and sick and unhappy, that it can take so long and seem so impossible to get better? Well, often we can have what we could say is an unconscious resistance to completing this natural self-healing cycle. In other words, we get stuck. And usually people are actually getting stuck in the regeneration phase, and they're not completing this natural self-healing cycle so that the body is restoring homeostasis and balance, and we come out the other side into health. So this unconscious resistance keeps us sick because it prevents this self-healing cycle completing itself. But we don't actually know this is happening. All we know is that we still have symptoms, but we don't realize that there's an unconscious resistance which is keeping us sick. And actually there's more than one type of unconscious resistance, which I'm going to explain. So let's look at these unconscious resistances. The first one, we're not aware of what we're not aware of. In other words, we don't understand how the body-mind works. We don't understand all the different concepts which I've been sharing in this series, that we have a stress regeneration cycle, that symptoms often come during the regeneration healing cycle. We don't understand the role that stress and emotions play in causing and perpetuating symptoms. We don't understand that most of our symptoms, or the cause of our symptoms, are actually set up in the first 7 years of life. We don't understand the events that are stored in our cells, in our memory, at a quantum level, at a cellular level, that are putting the physiology of the body out of balance. There are so many things that we don't understand. And it's not because we're stupid, it's because we haven't been taught this. If you think about what you learnt in school, in biology and in chemistry, did you learn this? I didn't learn this. I learnt this afterwards through my own exploration. So that's the first unconscious resistance. We're not aware of what we're not aware of. And that is why we can say all healing is awareness, becoming aware of what we were previously unaware of, and then we have new choices. So the second unconscious resistance is we're unconsciously afraid of seeing and meeting the emotional factors which are connected with the illness. And this relates back to the secondary gain video, which you might want to go and watch again to remind yourself of secondary gain. But really what we're saying here is that there are stress emotional factors related to the illness. And as a very young child, often we were afraid of feeling our feelings, or we were told it's wrong to have feelings. And so we unconsciously train ourselves to hold our anger inside, to hold our hurt and our disappointment inside. And we don't know how to process this emotional energy. So we don't know the emotional energy is even there. And more than that, we don't know how to process the emotions. And we unconsciously train ourselves to suppress and swallow and ignore and store our emotions. So you might like to ask yourself, well, yes, what is it that I do with my emotions? How do I manage my emotions? Am I able to identify what I'm feeling at any given moment? Because this is what emotional mastery is all about. It's being able to identify what you're feeling and being able to self-process those feelings in seconds or minutes. And that is what people learn in the emotional alchemy level 1 and 2 trainings. How to identify their feelings and how to self-clear those feelings. And it's absolutely transformative once we know how to do this. So unconscious resistance number 2 is we're unconsciously afraid of seeing or meeting and feeling our emotions. And that keeps the symptoms in place because they're directly related with the emotions. And unconscious resistance number 3 is we're unconsciously resisting going through the regeneration phase. In other words, there's something that is stopping us, apart from what I've already shared, there is something that is stopping us going through this regeneration phase. And one of these reasons is because when we go through the regeneration phase, that is the time when the body creates the symptoms or when we experience symptoms. And often when we're going through the regeneration phase, some of the typical symptoms are extreme tiredness and also inability to concentrate. Now, these are only just a couple of examples, but a lot of people are unconsciously resisting being tired and not being able to think clearly because if that happens, they feel that they won't be able to cope. They won't be able to get on with their daily life. Because obviously in our daily life, we need to be able to concentrate, we need to be able to have clear thinking and good memory, and we need to have good energy. So we unconsciously stop ourselves from healing because we may have to experience feeling off color and under par for a while. And so we're also keeping ourselves in the stress phase, and we're just not allowing ourselves to fully go into the regeneration phase so that we can come out the other side. So this is really important to recognize, is to recognize that maybe we're unconsciously resisting going through this regeneration phase and completing the healing cycle, and that is maybe keeping us sick. So what is the solution to all of this? Well, firstly, we need to become aware of what we're unaware of, and usually we're going to need help from someone who can help us see what we can't see ourselves. And remember, there's always the dark side of the moon, where however much you try to look at the dark side of the moon, you can never see it, which is why we need help from other people. We're also going to have to learn how to not be afraid of our feelings. And we're going to have to learn how to identify and self-clear emotional energy which is trapped in the cells, tissues, and organs. Now, to a great extent, once we learn how to do this, we can do it for ourselves. We may also need help from somebody else for some of the deeper, more long-term past issues, because sometimes it can be really, really difficult to identify those emotions and those situations. But either way, we're going to need to learn how to become aware of how we're feeling and how to self-process, or with help from somebody else, process those feelings out of our body-mind so that the body can restore homeostasis. And we're going to have to give ourselves permission to heal without fear because we trust the innate wisdom of the body-mind. This means that we're going to have to learn that sometimes we're going to have to go through these symptoms as part of the self-healing process of the body. Now, this also interrelates with the healing response, which is also being covered in this series in another video. So remember, the healing response is when we re-experience either physical and or emotional symptoms as that energy and information is clearing out of the body-mind. And it's always temporary. A healing response is always temporary. Usually it lasts 2 or 3 days when it's connected with a healing session that we've done, but it will be longer in terms of this overall stress regeneration cycle, because remember, in a way, the whole of this cycle is a healing response. The body is creating symptoms as a result of the cause-effect relationship of what happens in our life and how that impacts our mind, our emotions, and our body. So at the start of this video, I said the topic today is trust versus fear. Do you trust your body to self-heal, or do you go into fear when you're sick? So hopefully by now you may have a slightly different perspective and understanding on whether it's right to go into fear, or whether you could maybe start to trust your body that if it's developed symptoms, there's a reason for it. And obviously all the other videos in this series will help you put all the pieces of the puzzle together to understand that you can start to trust your body, that you can start to trust your body more, and that quite possibly it hasn't made a mistake by getting sick, and that you can trust that it has incredible ability to self-heal, and that it has incredible intelligence, that it knows what it's doing when it's creating symptoms, and it's just asking you to understand the cause and to clear that cause so that it can complete its self-healing cycle. And as always, remember, we heal a person, not a health condition. We heal a whole person's life, not an illness, which is why symptoms are just the end result, and we need to look at the total picture of a whole person's life in order to understand why the body is creating symptoms. And then, of course, how to heal.